Some people lose themselves slowly, one small compromise at a time. They tell themselves it's just this. Once it's just for family, it's just easier not to make a scene. I used to be one of those people, the kind who smiled through the sting and handed over whatever was asked. Money, time, dignity. Until the day I stood in a hallway outside my parents' dining room and realized they were planning to auction off my future again. This time wrapped in lace and labeled as my wedding. I remember the exact way my fingers dug into the wallpaper, one hand pressed against the wall for balance, the other clutching a glossy wedding magazine so tightly the pages crinkled. The dining room door was cracked just enough for their voices to slip through. I wasn't supposed to be home for another hour. My marketing meeting had ended early, and I'd felt oddly excited at the idea of surprising them, of walking into the house like a daughter who still believed this was a safe place. Instead, it was them who surprised me. She'll pay for everything just like she did for my wedding. That's what little sisters are for. Violet's laugh, too loud and too sharp, cut through the air like a blade dipped in sugar. My parents chuckled, a warm, familiar sound that suddenly made my stomach clench. Mom's voice followed, smooth and proud. We've already told everyone about the combined celebration. It's perfect. Her wedding, Violet and Thomas's 5th anniversary. Such beautiful symbolism. Dad cleared his throat in that way he always did before making a declaration. Her anniversary deserves as much attention as the wedding. 5 years is a milestone. My wedding magazine slipped from my hand and landed silently on the carpet. I didn't bend to pick it up. I couldn't move at all. The blood roared in my ears. My breathing turned shallow and my fingers tightened around the handle of my handbag until my knuckles went white. 5 years of therapy, of talking about boundaries and self-worth, of learning to say the word no out loud, evaporated in a single second. I was 10 years old again, watching Violet open my birthday presents while the adults clapped and called her such a good sharer for letting me hold my own gifts for a moment. I backed away from the door, careful not to make a sound every step, a quiet retreat from a war I hadn't realized was still being fought. My legs carried me outside to my car parked at the curb. I slid into the driver's seat and stared straight ahead, unable to process the manicured lawns and blue sky outside the windshield. The keys dangled from my fingers, but I didn't start the engine. Not yet. First, I needed to call Robert. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts. 3 deep breaths, just like my therapist had taught me. In for 4 counts. Hold. Out for 6. Then I pressed call. "Hey, beautiful." He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. How was the meeting? I swallowed, feeling the tremor in my chest, even though my voice came out surprisingly steady. "They're trying to do it again, Rob," I said. "Only this time I'm not going to let them." To understand why that sentence meant so much, you need to know what happened 5 years earlier. Back then, Violet had been the glowing bride-to-be, and I had been the reliable older sister, the one who always figured it out. 2 weeks after she announced her engagement, Dad called me into his study. I can still see the shelves lined with law books he never actually read, the heavy mahogany desk, the soft lamp that made everything feel more serious than it was. "Family comes first, Naomi," he said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Thomas just lost his job. Your sister needs help with the wedding expenses. Just temporary. You know we'll make it right." Mom stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her eyes cool and measuring. "If you really loved your sister," she began, and she didn't have to finish the sentence. I already knew how it ended. "If you really loved your sister, you'd hand over what you have. If you really loved your sister, you wouldn't make this difficult." So I didn't. I handed over my entire savings account, $15,000, the money I'd saved for tuition for a future that didn't revolve around anyone else's emergencies. "It's just 1 semester," Mom said when I had to drop out of college to work full-time. "You can always go back." But 1 semester became 2, then 3. I took double shifts, watched my classmates move on without me, and tried not to think about the dress Violet twirled in at her reception, a gown that cost more than my car. While Rosemary Clooney sang "Sisters" over the speakers, I stood in the corner and made myself a silent promise. Never again. Now in the quiet of my car outside my parents' house, that old promise rose up like a ghost and sat beside me. Tell me everything Robert said gently on the phone, and as I described what I'd heard through the dining room door, the combined celebration, the assumption I'd pay, the casual way my life had been penciled into their plans, I felt something new beneath the hurt. Not just anger, not just grief, a thin, steady line of resolve. This time, they weren't going to rewrite my future without my consent. This time, never again was going to mean something. After that call with Robert, life did what it always does when you're standing on the edge of a major shift. It pretended nothing had changed. I went back to work, answered emails, nodded through meetings, all while carrying the echo of my sister's voice in my chest. 2 weeks later, Mom called with her brightest tone and invited us to dinner. Just a casual family gathering at 6 p.m., she said the same way she used to introduce little favors that somehow ended with me paying the bill. By the time we arrived, the good china was out, and the chandelier had been dimmed to that flattering golden glow that always meant one thing: an announcement was coming, and it wasn't going to be mine. Violet and Thomas swept in 15 minutes late, laughing, perfumed, radiating that effortless entitlement I'd mistaken for confidence when we were younger. We'd barely taken our first bites when Mom cleared her throat and clasped her hands dramatically. "We have the most brilliant idea," she announced, eyes shining. We thought it would be so meaningful to combine Naomi's wedding with Violet and Thomas's 5th anniversary. 2 beautiful milestones, one unforgettable celebration. She looked at me as if she'd just laid a crown at my feet instead of a set of shackles. Violet slid a color-coded folder onto the table. "I've already started planning," she said, proud as a producer unveiling a big-budget film. "You'll have your own cake, and your special dance, of course, but the color palette should match my original wedding for continuity. People remember aesthetics." Dad nodded, already pleased with himself. "And of course Naomi will handle the finances. She's always been the practical one." Under the table, Robert's hand tightened around mine. In that small pressure, he reminded me of something important I was allowed to choose. The old version of me would have smiled and said, "Whatever you think is best, Dad." Instead, I heard my own voice say, "Let me think about it." 4 small words and the whole room shifted. Mom's smile cracked for a split second. "Think about it," she repeated, as if the concept were foreign. Violet's eyes glossed with instant woundedness. "I really thought you'd be excited," she whispered, "the perfect victim." Dad chuckled weakly. "Naomi's just being overly cautious. She always comes around." Everyone went back to eating like a verdict had been rendered. I smiled and played along, but inside I felt something uncoil. I wasn't coming around this time. I was circling. That night, when Mom suggested I stay over to help with a few details in the morning, I agreed. Not because I was surrendering, but because I wanted to see exactly how deep the knife went. The house slipped into silence around 11 p.m., the kind of silence I'd once found comforting. I waited another 30 minutes, then slid out of my childhood bed and padded down the hallway to Dad's study. The glow from the family computer lit up the room like a small, artificial moon. Mom's email was still logged in. My hand hovered over the mouse for a heartbeat before I clicked. I told myself I was just looking for clarity, but the truth is, I already knew something was wrong. An email thread near the top of the inbox was labeled Vendor Payments, Naomi. My name attached like a payment method. I opened it. "Don't worry about the deposits," Mom had written to Violet. "James and I have assured everyone that Naomi will cover all expenses once contracts are finalized." Below were attached invoices for venues, catering, entertainment, flowers, each note specifying that the bride will pay in full. My chest tightened. A notification popped up from her shopping account. I clicked on instinct and froze. A wedding dress filled the screen, dramatic and elaborate. Not the simple A-line gown I'd picked weeks ago. This one had been ordered 3 days earlier. I checked the payment details. The last 4 digits of the card were mine, my credit card. Heat crept up my neck as I pulled out my phone and sent Robert a quick text, "I need your bathroom," our code for "call me now." He rang almost immediately, and I put him on speaker. She used my card for a second dress, I said, opening my banking app with shaking fingers. And those weird deposits last month, they're withdrawals, labeled as wedding expenses. Robert's voice lost its softness. Naomi, that's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. That's financial abuse. I should have stopped there, but hurt has a way of turning into curiosity. An Excel file on the desktop caught my eye. W+A budget. Final. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Line after line of costs: $22,000 for the venue, $15,000 for catering, $8,000 for entertainment, $7,000 for flowers, $6,000 for photography, $5,000 for dresses. At the bottom, in Violet's favorite purple font, the total $63,000, and beneath that one handwritten note, scanned into the file Naomi's responsibility. I leaned back in Dad's leather chair, suddenly lightheaded, and my gaze landed on a framed photo of Violet's wedding. All of us smiling, my arm around my sister, completely unaware that my future had just been traded for her perfect day. I searched the desk drawers, not even pretending to myself that I was doing anything but prying now. Mom's journal lay tucked under a folder. I opened to a recent page. Naomi's always been the responsible one, she'd written. She'll understand, this is for family. Tucked inside was a receipt from their country club, a $5,000 membership renewal, on the same day Dad had sworn they were too strapped to help with my tuition years ago. The pattern wasn't new. I just never had the evidence laid out before me like a crime scene. I took photos of everything, the emails, the spreadsheet, the receipts, and sent them to a secure folder Robert and I shared. My hands were still shaking when I finally crept back to my old bedroom and lay staring at the ceiling until dawn. By the time the first gray light slid across the posters on my childhood walls, one thought pulsed steadily. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about whether I was going to keep paying for my place in a family that only loved what I could provide. The morning after that sleepless night, I sat in my office pretending to read reports while my phone buzzed endlessly in my bag. When I finally glanced down, I saw a message from Jessica, my oldest friend, and now a senior planner at an event company. "Call me ASAP," it read. "Violet just contacted us claiming to handle your wedding arrangements." I felt my pulse spike. I called immediately, and Jessica answered on the first ring. "Naomi, what is going on?" she demanded. "Your sister's trying to book vendors through me using your name. She says you're covering all payments. Is that true?" The sound that left my mouth wasn't quite laughter. It was something sharper, emptier. "No," I said quietly. "But I have proof now. They've been doing this for months." That evening, our small apartment became a war room. Robert's sister Emily dropped by straight after work, her posture crisp, her tone calm in that way people get after escaping their own controlling families. Mrs. Sullivan, our elderly neighbor, arrived a few minutes later carrying her usual peace offering, still warm banana bread, and listened as I laid everything out: the spreadsheet, the unauthorized charges, the fake dress order. Emily studied the documents carefully. "The problem isn't just Violet," she said finally, her voice steady. "Your mother enables her and your father enforces it. It's a full system, Naomi. You've been trained to keep the peace at your own expense." Mrs. Sullivan nodded solemnly. "You've been cast as the responsible one all your life, dear. The one who fixes things. They take advantage of that." The truth of it sank deep, heavy as stone. My phone rang again. Violet, her contact photo smiling too brightly. I answered because part of me still couldn't quite believe she'd crossed this far. "Remember that networking event I helped you get into?" she said sweetly. "Family connections are everything." "Speaking of, have you picked a venue yet?" "Time's running out." She didn't even pause before adding, "By the way, the down payment on the house Mom and Dad mentioned, they said it depends on the wedding going smoothly." My throat tightened. She'd always known exactly which strings to pull. "We'll see," I said, and hung up before she could lace the threat in more sugar. Over the next few days, the pressure escalated. Mom would call to remind me that Grandma's heart wasn't strong and that stressful conflict could make things worse. Dad hinted that my career helped, but his reputation might suffer if people saw me behaving irrationally. It was all so familiar I could almost script it myself. But underneath the anxiety was something new, a hard little ember of defiance that refused to die out. One night, over takeout cartons and exhaustion, I looked at Robert and said, "They're expecting me to sign the venue contract tomorrow. Let's make sure it's in their names." The next evening I joined them at the chosen venue, Rosewood Manor. The grand ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and echoing marble floors, every inch designed for spectacle. "Perfect for your sister's big entrance," Dad said, proudly waving at the vaulted ceiling, "and plenty of room for all 200 guests." My stomach tightened. 200. We agreed on 50. Mom waved it off. "We couldn't possibly cut anyone now. It's all settled." The venue manager, a neat man with graying hair named Mr. Phillips, handed us the contract. "If we can just get signatures and the deposit today," he said. Dad uncapped his pen, but I placed a hand over the paper. "Actually," I said, my voice calm. "Almost too calm," Robert and I agreed. "Both our signatures are required for any contracts. It's non-negotiable." The pause that followed could have swallowed the room. "What are you talking about?" Mom asked sharply. "Robert doesn't need to worry about details. That's what family is for." I met her eyes evenly. "It's our wedding. We make decisions together." Violet laughed under her breath. "Since when do you make decisions at all?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. "Since I found these." I spread the printouts across the table, unauthorized transactions, credit card statements, the fraudulent dress order. The silence turned brittle. Mom's face went pale. Dad looked from me to Violet, confusion flickering into fury. "You told me she approved those charges," he said slowly. Violet's voice lost its veneer. "She always pays. That's what she does." Something inside me broke open, not in collapse, but in release. "You ruined my education for Violet's wedding," I said quietly. "You're not ruining my marriage." The words didn't shake. They landed solidly like stones on firm ground. Mr. Phillips cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should give you a moment." I shook my head. "No need. I'll pay the $6,000 deposit. The remaining $57,000 is your responsibility." Violet's mouth fell open. "You can't do this. We've told everyone." I met her gaze. "Then I suggest you tell them the truth." Dad studied me for a long moment, something almost like reluctant respect flickering in his eyes. Finally, he signed the paper with less flair than usual. As we left, Robert took my hand. "You okay?" he murmured. I nodded. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." That night, Jessica called with a whisper of hope in her voice. "I found another place," she said. "A small lakeside chapel open the weekend before the big event. Perfect for your real wedding." I laughed, the sound strange and new in my own ears. "That's the one," I said. The next evening, Robert's parents offered their lake house for the reception. When Jessica hesitated over the lost deposit, I shook my head. "It's my freedom fee," I told her, "and it's worth every penny." As the weeks went on, I built my plan piece by piece, quietly, deliberately, the way you build a bridge out of the ruins someone else left behind. I ordered a simple sundress, canceled the fraudulent gown, and changed every password I owned. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they'd taken. When I finally looked in the mirror one night, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were clear, her shoulders squared. She looked ready. The day of the so-called family celebration arrived under a sky so bright it almost felt mocking. I sat in front of my mirror, a makeup artist dusting powder across my face, while my phone buzzed nonstop beside me. It was 9:17 a.m. I smiled faintly at the reflection staring back, calm, collected, almost radiant in the borrowed bridal robe. "You sure about this?" the makeup artist asked softly, sensing something in the air. "Completely," I said, because what they thought was my wedding day wasn't mine at all. It was theirs, the performance they'd scripted, the illusion they'd tried to trap me in. Mine was happening somewhere else entirely. Robert lounged on the couch behind me, still in jeans and a t-shirt, sipping coffee with an amused grin. "They buying it?" he asked. "They're already at the venue," I said, scrolling through the flurry of texts from Mom and Violet. "Your father's greeting the Hendersons now one read. Remember, we need you here by 11:30 a.m. For sister photos, another." I snapped a quick selfie, hair done neutral background, and sent it to the family group chat with the caption, "Getting started." Running a bit behind, but so excited, and 3 champagne emojis for good measure. "Perfect bait," Robert said, raising his mug. "To freedom." At 10:45 a.m., I sent another update. Hair done, makeup next. About 30 minutes behind schedule. Almost instantly, Mom replied, "People are asking when you'll arrive. What should I tell them?" Violet followed with, "This is so inconsiderate, Naomi. My anniversary is at risk because of your disorganization." I switched the phone to Do Not Disturb and slipped into my real dress, the simple lace sundress I'd chosen myself. No train, no corset, no price tag steeped in guilt, just clean, soft fabric that moved with me instead of against me. Outside, sunlight glittered across the lake as Jessica and Emily strung white lights through the birch trees. Robert's parents were already setting out the wildflowers they'd brought from their garden, their quiet kindness filling the space with something I hadn't felt at a family event in years: peace. "You ready?" Robert asked as he joined me on the porch, his navy suit catching the light. I took his hand and smiled. More than I've ever been. At noon, Jessica returned from her reconnaissance mission at Rosewood Manor, breathless and laughing. "You should see them," she gasped, clutching her phone like a tabloid reporter. "Your mom keeps making announcements about minor delays. Your dad is sweating through his suit. And Violet, oh my God, Violet's blaming you for insisting on her hairstylist. The guests look like they're watching a slow-motion disaster. I could almost see it, 200 overdressed strangers murmuring in confusion as the clock ticked past noon, the champagne sweating in untouched flutes, my parents trying to hold the performance together. I typed one final text and hit send. Minor zipper emergency. Start without me. Be there in 20 minutes. Then I powered the phone completely off and turned to Robert. "Let's get married," I said. The ceremony was small, quiet, breathtakingly real. 20 of our closest friends stood beneath the birch trees, their faces glowing in the late morning light. Robert's father officiated, his voice steady with joy as he spoke words that felt pure and solid, like they could weather any storm. No one glanced at a phone. No one whispered about money or appearances. When he finally said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Robert's hands trembled slightly as he cupped my face. Our kiss wasn't perfect, it was real, and that made it beautiful. Across town, I imagined Mr. Phillips, the venue manager, presenting my parents with the bill. The contract had been explicit. The signers, James and Margaret Thompson, were legally responsible for the remaining $57,000. My $6,000 deposit was clearly documented as non-refundable, but limited. Their dream event built on deceit had transformed into their own financial reckoning. That night, during our quiet dinner by the lake, Jessica's phone buzzed. "You might want to hear this," she said, putting it on speaker. Mom's voice poured through the line, ragged with panic. "Jessica, please tell Naomi this isn't funny anymore. The venue needs payment tonight. They're threatening legal action." James had to give them his retirement account information. Behind her, Violet's shrill voice cut through. "What do you mean? What did I do?" This was Mom and Dad's plan, too. The message ended in chaos. Silence filled the table before Robert lifted his glass, his expression equal parts pride and awe. To my wife, he said softly, who taught her family the most valuable lesson they'll ever learn. I raised my glass to his. Freedom was worth every penny. As laughter rippled through our friends, I thought of that old version of me, the one who sat outside her parents' dining room too afraid to move. I wanted to tell her she'd made it, that someday she'd choose herself and the world wouldn't end, it would begin. But I wasn't done yet, because I knew with absolute certainty that the reckoning wasn't over. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m. the next morning, sharp and insistent the way my father always knocked when he wanted control over a room before he even entered it. Robert glanced up from the kitchen table where our wedding photos were spread out to dry. Right on schedule, he murmured, his tone calm but his jaw tight. I nodded, smoothing my hair back as I went to open the door. I'd spent years walking into their confrontations trembling. Not today. Mom stood there first, eyes swollen, mascara smudged into gray shadows. Dad loomed behind her, his face an iron mask of anger. Violet hovered near the steps, arms crossed, shifting between defiance and panic. "How could you do this to us?" Mom's voice cracked before she even finished the sentence. "After everything we've done for you," I stepped aside. "Come in," I said, evenly gesturing toward the living room. The scent of their expensive perfume hit me like an echo of old power, but it didn't sting anymore. They filed in without waiting for permission the way they always had, and stopped short when they saw the portfolio laid out neatly on the dining table. Papers, photos, and a small digital recorder. Dad didn't sit. "You're legally responsible for this bill, Naomi," he snapped. "You think you can humiliate your own family and walk away? It ends now." Violet jabbed a manicured finger at me, her voice dripping venom. "I already told everyone what kind of person you really are. You abandoned your own wedding for a childish grudge." I didn't flinch. Instead, I walked to the table, flipped open the portfolio, and pressed play. Violet's laughter filled the room. "She'll pay for everything just like she did for my wedding. That's what little sisters are for." Then the unmistakable sound of my parents' laughter followed warm, complicit, cruel. For a long, suspended second, no one spoke. Mom went pale. Dad's mouth opened, then shut. He started to recover with a stammered recording conversations without consent is. Perfectly legal in this state, Robert interrupted, stepping forward. His calm was deliberate, almost surgical. One-party consent. And in this case, that party was Naomi. I laid out the next piece printed bank statements, each marked with unauthorized transactions. "Here's proof of the $6,000 deposit I agreed to pay," I said evenly. "That's my only financial contribution. Everything else, every fraudulent charge and contract, falls under your signatures." Mom reached for the papers with trembling hands, but the venue manager said, "I have the email trail right here," I interrupted, sliding another printout across the table, "where I clearly stated my limited involvement and received written confirmation that you and Dad were financially responsible for the remainder." Violet snatched one of the papers, eyes darting wildly. "This doesn't prove anything. You can't just—" "Oh, but it does." I opened a folder and revealed the final screenshots, receipts tied to my credit card, one labeled duplicate wedding dress purchase. Her breath caught. "That dress wasn't yours to buy," I said quietly. "You used my information without permission. That's fraud." Dad's face turned ashen. "Naomi, be reasonable. We can't possibly cover $57,000. "No," I said, my voice steady as stone. "You can't. But you will. That's what happens when you forge someone's consent." I handed him a final envelope. Emily's contact from the law firm had drafted it. "This letter outlines your liability. The venue has your signatures. You're legally bound." Mom sank onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. "Why would you do this to your own family?" "I didn't," I said softly. "You did this to yourselves. I'm just done paying the bill." Dad turned on Violet. "Your retirement fund," Mom whispered weakly to him. "We'll have to use your retirement fund." "My retirement fund." His voice cracked into fury. "This was your idea." The silence that followed felt heavy, final. Something between them fractured in that moment, something that had always been cemented by shared control. Now it was just dust. I walked to the door and opened it wide. "You can leave now," I said simply. "My new family is coming over soon. We're celebrating." They stood frozen, as if trying to decide whether to fight or flee. Violet was the first to move. She gathered her bag with shaking hands, her face flushed red with something between anger and humiliation. At the threshold, she turned back and met my eyes. For the first time in our lives, she looked almost human, small, uncertain. "You really think this makes you better than us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "No," I said. "It just makes me free." The door clicked shut behind them with a quiet that felt like release. I leaned back against it, exhaling deeply as Robert's arms came around me. My body trembled, not from fear this time, but from the exhaustion of finally being done. "You okay?" he murmured into my hair. "I think so," I said. Then after a pause, "Actually, yes." My phone buzzed on the counter. Jessica and the others were on their way bringing champagne and takeout from our favorite restaurant. I looked at the framed photo on our shelf, the lake, the sun, and us laughing, unposed and unafraid. For the first time in my life, I whispered, "I'm free." But freedom, I would learn, isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning. A year later, the air in our new home smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Afternoon sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors Robert and I had installed ourselves, pooling on the table where I was arranging a centerpiece of crimson and gold chrysanthemums. It was Thanksgiving Day, our first one as husband and wife, and the first holiday I could remember where my chest didn't feel tight. From the kitchen doorway, Robert raised his wine glass, smiling the way he did when words weren't enough. "1 year exactly," he said. I smiled back. 1 year since we chose ourselves. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way that once would have felt unfamiliar. The wedding photo on our mantel showed us laughing mid-vow beneath the birch trees. Sunlight in our hair, no cameras, no perfection, just joy. It wasn't a performance, and that made it eternal. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on a towel, half expecting Jessica with her usual pumpkin pie. But through the peephole, I saw someone I hadn't expected in a long time, Violet. She stood alone on the porch, her coat too thin for November, her eyes red but not angry. For a moment, I simply watched her, unsure what to feel. The last time we'd stood face to face, she'd been throwing accusations like daggers. Now she looked small, human. When I opened the door, she met my gaze without the usual smirk. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice low. "Really apologize." I studied her face, searching for the glint of manipulation that had always lurked behind her tears. But this time, I didn't see it. Just exhaustion, and maybe finally regret. Dad and Mom had to use their retirement savings to pay the venue, she continued quietly. It was a reality check for all of us. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the warm light inside. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "The others will be here soon," I said. She nodded and entered her steps, careful, like she was afraid to touch anything. "Thomas threatened to leave unless I started therapy," she admitted after a long silence. "He said he couldn't be married to someone who treats family like a ladder." Her voice trembled on the word. "How's that going?" I asked, genuinely curious. She gave a weak laugh, hard but necessary. The front door opened again, and Jessica swept in, followed by Emily and Robert's parents, laughter and warmth flowing in with them like sunlight. They greeted Violet kindly but cautiously, and she offered shy smiles in return. We gathered around the table, glasses clinking, food steaming, conversation easy, in a way that still felt miraculous to me. Robert raised his glass. To chosen family and second chances, he said, his eyes finding mine across the table. Everyone echoed the toast, and the clinking of glasses felt like a benediction. As dinner went on, Emily's younger cousin mentioned the pressure she felt from her parents to change her college major, her voice small but trembling with frustration. I looked at her and felt a pang of recognition. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do," I told her gently, "is refuse to be someone's victim. Boundaries aren't walls. They're the foundation for healthy love." The words came out effortlessly now, not as armor, but as truth. Over the past months, I'd started volunteering at the community center, mentoring young women struggling under the weight of family expectations. The scholarship fund Robert and I created with the money we saved from the canceled venue had already helped 2 girls enroll in college this fall. Every time I signed the letters to them, I thought about that moment in my father's study when he'd said, "Family comes first." He'd been right, but not in the way he meant. Family comes first when it's built on love, not obligation. As the night wound down, guests drifted out with hugs and leftover containers. Only Violet stayed behind, helping me clear plates in silence. When the last dish was washed, I turned to her. "You're welcome here as my sister," I said softly, "not as the person who tried to ruin my wedding." She met my eyes and nodded, accepting the boundary without protest. "Mom started to see it too," she said after a moment. "How she enabled everything. She asked if she could call you sometime." I hesitated, then nodded slowly. Maybe. When I'm ready. Later, after the house had grown quiet again, Robert appeared with a small package wrapped in silver paper. "Happy anniversary," he whispered, placing it in my hands. Inside was a shadow box, our framed $6,000 venue deposit receipt, mounted against burgundy velvet. The inscription read, "Best investment we ever made in our freedom and our future." Tears stung my eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. I traced the glass with my fingertips, smiling at the simple truth of it. Some lessons cost more than others. But freedom, the kind that lets you breathe love and live without fear, is worth every penny. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I hope you remember this peace built on silence isn't peace at all. Sometimes walking away isn't betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes it's the only way to make room for the love you truly deserve. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to set a boundary that changed everything?